Hi, it's Peter here. There has been a lot of discussion about the image quality on OM-1, especially the ISO performance, high ISO performance to be exact. OMDS claimed that it has two-stop better ISO performance than the predecessors. And let's look into that because that is something that interests me because I want to see if that claim is true and what does it actually mean when you say it's better ISO performance. Is it noise? What it is? And I know it's not the most important thing in photography. There are a lot more important things, but I still wanted to find out because a lot of you have been asking and discussing about it, and here are my results. I did first, of course, some lab tests in my studio, and I had the 40-150mm f2.8 lens, and I used that because then I can have it on a tripod easily so that I can just switch the camera in the back, and it makes it so that the image is exactly the same crop and everything is same. I had the same settings, of course, on the cameras, and I tested different ISOs on both of these cameras. And the other one is E-M1 Mark III, and then, of course, the OM-1 was the other one. And I tested throughout the ISO range, all the way from 200 all the way up to 1002 and 400. That is the highest from OM-1. E-M1 Mark III's highest is 25,600, so I stopped there, and I will compare those. I didn't really look into the extended high ISO on EM on the OM-1. I will do that later because it's more important, but more interesting to test these two cameras side by side and have a slight battle, and also see if the claims that OMDS made are true, because of course people have been doubting that, and you know, I want to find out myself. First, let's start with the lab images, and then we'll go outdoors, or I will show images from outdoors that are in real life images, something that you might do in anyway. So I think those images are more important than the lab test, but the lab test will give you some information and some things to look in when you go outdoors and photograph. And let's start with this ISO 6400. And when you look at these images, you don't really see a big difference. And this is something that, of course, might get you fooled. And like it did for me, first I looked at, hey, there's no difference. What's going on? And here it gets a bit tricky. If you look at the color patches here, you know, no big difference, if difference at all. And if we look at the deepest blacks in the shadows, we start to see a difference. This is really black because the canvas that I use is VL Flock, which absorbs 99.5% of the light. And then when it is in shadow, there isn't much light. But here we can see some difference. OM-1 image is a bit cleaner, and it also has less color shift, like you can see on the E-M1 Mark III image. And here we are talking about the better ISO performance. And then if we look at the 25,600 images, the difference is clear. So the higher the ISO, the bigger the difference is. And here we can clearly see the difference in noise levels too. You can clearly see that the OM-1 image is cleaner in the darkest shadows. But if we look at the image and look at the color patches, the difference isn't that big. We have to confirm that result when we go outdoors and do some nighttime shots to see the difference, if there is any, on this same ISO levels when we do real-time photography. And I also took an image with the lens cap on with 25,600 with both cameras, and there is some difference in the noise, clearly. I don't know if this means anything, but if we look at these images, this is much cleaner. I admit that it puzzles me a bit. Of course, I'm happy that the case is like this, but still it makes me wonder, and that's why I did go outside, which is a more of a real-world test. And let's start with this image, ISO 6400. The sun has just set. It's about 20 minutes after sunset. You can see the quite clear sky, and then you can see this, I don't know, wall, this playing ground in a suburb in the western part of Helsinki. I took this because, you know, looks good, the place. It's a fun image, and this is something that I could have done anyways without the testing, and that's why I think these type of images are best, because then it clearly shows the results for your images. So rely on your own images instead of someone else's lab tests. Go to the outdoors or wherever you photograph and see for yourself. But if you look at this image, when it's on Lightroom like this, when it fits into the screen, you don't really see the difference. There might be a bit different in the noise level on the sky. You might see that. But then when we blow it up to 100%, you can start to see the difference. And if you look at it to 200% and look at this detail here, you clearly see that OM-1 is sharper. It is a bit better quality. And then what about the dynamic range? If we look at the edges of this wall, you can clearly see that there are more details in the OM-1 image. With this exposed to the right, and with these both photographs have exactly the same exposure, you can see that there are more details in the highlights on E-M1 Mark III. If we lower the highlights on the OM-1 camera to match that, we can see that it can recover the highlights, which is good, so that we have the exact same image but more detail in the shadows. This might indicate that there is more dynamic range to work with. But of course, I did not measure it. I don't have anything to measure it for it. The only thing that I have to rely on is, of course, the images that I would make anyways and see if I can get better results from OM-1 than I do get from E-M1 Mark III. That's the only thing that matters. Let's look at some images that I made with ISO 25600. And here you can see the clear difference. These images are made handheld with the same lens, with the same settings. The only difference is the camera. And of course the crop might be a bit different because I did handheld. I tried to make them as close as possible, but they're not. But they're close enough and really can tell the difference. Here we can see how much better the OM-1 image is. The noise level, to be honest, there is not much difference. The OM-1 noise maybe looks a bit better, if you can say that, but to be honest, the difference isn't that big. But if you look at the colors, look at the street here in the front. Look at the magenta on E-M1 Mark III, and then look at the OM-1, much cleaner. And then, when I said that there's not much difference in the noise, but if you look at the details in the back, you have some ladders here on the top of the building, and look how much more detail there is on this image, OM-1, than there is on E-M1 Mark III. So there is a clear difference, and this is what we talk about better ISO performance. The image looks better. And cleaning up this magenta color cast is not an easy task because you need to really tweak the image to get it to be the same. I didn't even try that. It's possible that you could do that, but it's take too much time. So I prefer the OM-1 image on this. And here we do have clear proof that the ISO performance is better. If that's something that matters to you, then, I very seldom need to use these high ISOs. I mainly shoot with low ISO, and there the difference isn't that big if there is difference at all. But we can clearly see that high ISO, there is a difference. And then these two images are also made with ISO 25600. And if we look at this, there is the same difference. A slight magenta color cast on E-M1 Mark III. If we punch into 200%, look at the text. OM-1 clearly shows more detail, and you can really read the text compared to E-M1 Mark III. Of course, you can read it, but it's not as clear as it is on the image on OM-1. Here we can see again that there is a difference, even though the noise level isn't that big of a difference in here, as you see. And then I have this image that was made way too late. The sky is pitch black. I would prefer to have some details in the sky, but I made it because I wanted to see the difference in the sky when it's pitch black, and also some pitch black areas. There are really bright lights, and this is of course exposed to the right. The highlights are just a bit overexposed, but if we lower the highlights, we can get rid of that. But let's leave it as it is. And look at the sky. There is a clear difference, like I expected, because that's the same difference that I got in the lab tests. And also the details. Look at the windows on the roof here. You have more details in the OM-1 image than you have on the E-M1 Mark III image. But the overall image quality is a lot better. That's of course subjective, but a small improvement is always welcome. So what are my thoughts? Is OMDS right on this one? I would say yes, because they never said, which actually was a bit confusing, they never said about 2 stops better noise improvement. They said better ISO improvement. And as you clearly see, the E-M1 Mark III image has a lot more banding and a lot more noise in the deepest shadows. So in that sense, the OM-1 is a lot better. And you can also increase the shadows or open up the shadows a lot more from OM-1 because there is less noise. And that makes it a lot better in low light situation when you're using high ISO. What about dynamic range? Like I said, there's no way I can measure that if it's one stop or not. But to be honest, I can get more information out of the OM-1 images than I do get from E-M1 Mark III images. Is that a big deal for me? Well, sometimes it is. Of course, it's better if you have more room to work with your images, then it's of course okay. And the best way to get the best image quality and least amount of noise is to expose to the right. Then you have the brightest possible image, because then on the brighter part of the image there are less noise, or there is less noise than in the darker shadows. And then when you have a really bright image, you lower the exposure so that the noise gets less visible. That's the best way to get your images as clean as possible, if that is something that you want. But as you probably saw, that there is a difference between the ISO performance on OM-1 and E-M1 Mark III, at least according to this test, and I'm really happy that I can get better image quality from OM-1, even though, like I said many times, image quality is not the first priority when you are talking about photography in general. Of course, there are some genres where you need really clean and sharp images, but in many genres, who cares? It's more about the story and the content of your photograph and the subject and the feeling that it delivers or makes the viewer feel when they see that image. That's much more important. But like I said, sometimes having really clean images is a lot better solution. And here is my video about OM-1 and the 20 things that I like about it. But hey, thanks for watching and bye for now.